Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson, and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Water systems don't exist in a vacuum. Systems are human endeavors run by operators. And the great majority of America's roughly 90,000 water systems with under 1,000 connections are really small ones, run by crews of one, maybe 2 or 3 people. Blake Anderson knows that world better than almost anyone. A certified operator who has spent 14 years running water systems, Blake is the founder of Mogollon Water Management, which operates and maintains community water systems across the White Mountains of northern Arizona. And he now also lends that operator's eye to Ziptility, the asset management platform built for small utilities that acquired his platform last year. I loved this conversation. It is a trip into the weeds of what it takes to run a small system, and crucially, how it can be better. He knows what it's like to be responsible for a system and the lives that depend on it, from operating a backhoe to fix a leak in the middle of the night, all the way to explaining budget trade-offs to an untrained community system board. This is a view of the heart of our industry we don't get often enough. And Blake's the perfect person to bring the operating practicality to Ziptility's platform that will be transformational to the vast majority of America's water systems. Please enjoy my conversation with the excellent Blake Anderson. Blake, it's really excellent to see you. People listening to this can't see this, but we've decided to both dress and look the same today. I hope you're feeling good about that.
Just another sexy bald guy with a beard, man. So.
Absolutely. May we always unite.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this. I've been an admirer of your work ever since Tyler at Ziptility told me of your kind of burgeoning conversations. And the more I've learned, the more I liked. And I'm really looking forward to diving into all you've learned about your section of the water sector. But I'm going to start with a very simple question, which is, what is a system operator and what do they do?
That's a simple question. It depends a great deal on what the size of the utility that you're talking about. If you imagine a large utility, city of New York, city of Los Angeles, you're going to have hundreds of operators that take care of the system. And so some of those people are going to have specialized roles. In fact, basically, they're all going to have specialized roles. Some are going to be focused on treatment. Some are going to be focused on production, SCADA and electronic controls, preventive maintenance, emergency response. As you get smaller in the systems, you have less people. They still have to wear all those different hats. And eventually you get down to a small-sized utility or a rural utility, and your GM is operating as a CEO in a lot of ways and running the utility day to day, but they're also probably still run a backhoe, showing up for leaks or responding to customer service calls. But a lot of our job is making sure those fundamentals are in place. You've got enough production. Do you have enough supply? Can you meet demand? Is the water safe? And really, it's a miracle of modern supply chains that we can supply water at the cost that we do. It's heavy. It's a lot to lift. And the compliance piece, I feel like it's a lot of focus, but there's so much that goes into the work. And when you really know a system well and you're operating a system for a period of time, you can walk into the room and you can tell if a pump's been running for too long just by the temperature. You can feel the motor heat that's radiating off. You can smell the bearings and you can just tell when things are off. And so a good operator will have a good pulse on the condition of their assets, and they know it just like you know your home.
You mentioned obviously the small utilities, which is where you've spent your time. Can you just go a layer deeper on the actual operating reality? You said GM is going to be the CEO, but they're also out in the backhoe, making sure, like, as you shrink the size of the utilities, it's really such an interesting way of putting it, right? The numerator of the number of jobs is just, you're just going across. It's a smaller thing, but you still have exactly the amount of same number of jobs that you have to do. Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like on the ground?
It's hard. I would say would be the first thing. We have roughly 100,000 utilities here in the United States. I'm sure that your audience is well aware of that. Of those, 80 to 90% roughly are below 10,000 service connections. The vast majority of those are under 1,000 service connections. And that's really kind of the line that we tend to see, unless it's municipally owned, where you start getting into contract operations. And so you no longer need a full-time employee to really operate the system day to day, or to have somebody on site 24/7. Contract operations can really be a beautiful thing, or it really can be kind of the dark underbelly of the utility industry, quite frankly. You have very limited oversight. So you typically have a governing board or whoever the stakeholders that are overseeing the utility. And then you have a billing clerk that's usually fractional as well. And so that could be a secretary that's there to support the board. That could be somebody that's just taking care of the bookkeeping. And then you have an operator that's contracted. And that can truly be just a one-man show. His day job is a plumber, but he has a backhoe and can go out and fix leaks. And so that's the person that somebody's hiring. But they still have to do all of those responsibilities. And like in our county here in Southern Navajo County in Arizona, we have 64 public utilities, and we have 60 certified operators, and 50% of them work for 3 of the utilities. That means that everybody else is operating all of these different systems, but there's companies like ours that we operate 11 utilities with 3 full-time staff. And so our goal as contract operators is to provide the same level of service that we would operate as you'd see in like a public works department. But it's hard to do. I mean, we have to do that over a 50-mile area. Everybody's got their own systems and processes. You've got different response times that are required. You have to be able to mobilize equipment over this huge area. I really think that small system operators, not necessarily just contract operators, tend to be the best operators because you have to be so well-rounded. You have to know how the wells work. You're not pigeonholed into these specific like niche roles.
And what is the tech stack? Normally, what does that look like for what you are like relying upon? I think it's just really in context for what you're now kind of trying to build. Like, what does that interface like between you and the system contract operator?
I would say that for most people who aren't us, they would respond to that question with, what's a tech stack? That they don't have that isn't even in the vocabulary, honestly.
Absolutely.
Here's what it looks like. We get a contract with the new system and we take it over. Day one, we show up and somebody hands us a milk crate full of old compliance records and sampling paperwork. They give us a paper county map with Sharpie lines drawn on it that show where their water mains are. And that's basically it. But we get a meter read sheet too. So we got a list of addresses for who the customers are, and go for it. Go wild.
See, go nuts. Here's some paper. Go nuts.
Seriously. Yeah. Without exception. I mean, I'm not just exaggerating for effect here. That really is what we typically get. And we're happy if we have a set of paper maps. If they put dots where the valves are, even better. You know, a lot of our process is just kind of onboarding in those first 6 months. The one through line I would say is they all have a billing system. That's without exception. We haven't seen a utility that doesn't have some sort of billing system in place, unless they're just serving like their own campus, a school or something along those lines, and they're not billing. If there's billing happening, they typically bought that tech. And that's a conversation that I try to explain to people is you can't imagine running your system without a billing software now. That's how it is when you start adopting these other technologies, because it makes your life so much easier. And it's gotten so cost effective. SCADA being a prime example. When I started off my career, the municipality I was working at had spent $200,000 for this huge server, fill up the size of my office. And they had a single computer there and ran 2 wells and a tank site off of it. 10 years later, cloud-based SCADA has made that so it's small size of a small backpack and we can install it in the morning. And now 5 years from there, with the advent of AI, we can deploy our own SCADA and just get the sensors that we need and the hardware that we need. As long as you're dealing with the cybersecurity side of things and you keep some mechanical safety controls, we can deploy that for $500. It's now getting to the point where, and this is kind of how we've taken the approach, I don't have time to advocate to each one of our board members of why they need to adopt this tech. We need it because we know how to operate a utility, and it makes our lives so much easier that we'll just pay for it in a lot of cases and bring it on board. because that means that instead of me having to have somebody at a well site checking it for 10 minutes every few days, I can have 24/7, 365 monitoring. I can see what the pumps are doing. I can see what the wells are doing. And then you can start to make those operational changes that really make a big impact on how the utility functions and operates.
Absolutely. Which is a reasonable segue to talk about Mogollon, which is the team that you set up before joining forces with Ziptility. Walk us through the thought process behind setting up your own contract operations business. What did the arc of that business look like? And then kind of take us into the beginning of the Ziptility conversation. Why did light bulbs start coming on in that respect?
First of all, what is a Mogollon? Probably to most of our audience. I'm proud of you for pronouncing.
Oh, I'm so embarrassed I don't know.
I'm very proud of you for even pronouncing it right. We started a company called Mogollon Water Management. We live in the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. So it's the dividing line between the desert and the high pines up here in Flagstaff. Nailed it. And we're in the best part of Arizona. Just don't tell anybody about it. Got a ski resort probably like 45 minutes from us. It's not all scorched desert, you know. I really don't deserve, I feel like, a lot of credit for having this master plan of wanting to start a successful contract operations company. I started, I think, a lot of the same way that a lot of guys do. Is I was an operator full time. Just by happenstance, I had my first kid and was looking for some ways to make some extra income. The state of Arizona at the same time put out that they allowed you to put your name on a list of available operators. And I was just looking for other job opportunities. I had sheer dumb luck that my parents named me Blake Anderson. And so when this list comes out, I've got my grade 4 certifications and I show up first alphabetically. Like that's really what it came down to. And so I got a call from a small system of about just under 400 connections that had lost their operator. They had a maintenance guy who wanted to get certified. And they said, hey, we just need somebody for 3 months to help us stay in compliance. This guy's going to get certified and you can go on. What would it cost? And I gave him a number. Well, that was in 2018. And so here we are 8 years later, and they just signed a 3-year contract with us to keep going. And now we run their whole system, operations, maintenance, and likely management here pretty quick. I just did it as kind of a side gig, looking to make some extra income. And I did that until 2020. And then I got a call from another utility called Pinedale Estates. And I showed up there. They were looking for somebody to actually maintain the system and operate it, which meant that we would have to show up and fix leaks. And I was really hesitant to take anything like that on, but just respectfully said, hey, I'll come and tour your system and see what's going on. Went and met with this board and heard their story and saw their facilities, and honestly was just shocked. This system in particular had 90 service connections, small little residential subdivision, and they had selenium levels that were 8 times the legal limit. So 800% the MCL from their single well. And this has been going on since the 90s. It's hard to describe to the audience unless you really see it. But I mean, we're talking the same levels of selenium from their single source that Flint, Michigan had for lead. When we fix a leak and we dig something up, we can smell the water before we see it. That's the kind of like crisis that we're talking about. This little district had taken on and created their own district and basically bought out the private utility. And when they did that, they were really doing it because they ran out of water and they couldn't have pressure from basically 8 in the morning till 8 at night at the upper elevations of this system. And so half of the community just didn't have water whatsoever. And so they basically forced the private owner to condemn, took over the district and said, hey, we can't do a worse job than this guy was doing. And in doing so, they found out that the system had been classified as a non-community, non-transient system, which is like a campground. And so they weren't testing for all these contaminants. And so once they got it classified correctly, they found out that they had this selenium exceedance that was just, it would be $1 million a year if you treated it just to haul off the waste for 96 connections. I mean, it was devastating. I just got to say, like, I felt morally obligated to do something. It was a failure of a lot of the systems and processes that were supposed to be in place. I still had a full-time job. We were in the middle of building our own house, not like hiring a contractor to do it, like Blake out there with a bag of hammer and nails, like framing my own house. And had no time whatsoever, but I just felt like somebody needed to care and somebody needed to do something. From there, I was introduced to the state of Arizona and their wonderful team at the Technical Assistance Department. They introduced us to the people at Arizona WIFA that manage the SRFs, and they basically held our hand through getting funding for this system and actually putting them on a path to sustainability. And so now, 5 years later, 6 years later, we're just about to close out that project, and they're going to have good, clean water supply for the first time in the past 30 years. And that feels really good. I joke around and say it's my own personal hostage negotiations to get out of this situation, but I really care about the community. And that's really where we started. And so because we were able to go get them funding, and the neighboring community started hearing like, hey, they hired this guy and he got him $1 million. Maybe we should talk to him. We started getting more calls and more calls and more calls. And then all of a sudden our claim to fame started being, we can take these systems who have chronic violations and lots of infrastructure issues and course correct and get them on the right path. And so over the past 5 or 6 years, we've grown from just Blake driving around a Tacoma pickup with a truck bed full of tools to now having full-time staff, having GIS. We're managing actively about $24 million in infrastructure projects across all of these utilities that in large part have been funded through SRF projects or grant funding, and really are supplying a lot of the capacity gaps. And so how does Ziptility tie into this was kind of the interesting part. We were a customer of theirs first. What happened was I'm dealing with all these systems and I'm trying to figure out how do we onboard them. We don't have any records. We want to capture all this information as we're going out in the field. And really we need an update set of maps because most of the maps are from like 50 years ago. And just by happenstance, Ziptility happened to give us a cold call. And I had been looking for maps through engineering services and had just gotten some quotes for, I think it was $28,000 for one of these small systems to have somebody come and fly our utility and map it. But we still had to go out and paint the lines on the ground and basically walk the system with somebody. And honestly, it just felt kind of insulting. Like this shouldn't be this hard to do. Like engineers are really neat and valuable. But the way I saw it was, dang, you trust us to run this whole utility and keep all these people safe. Like, surely we can figure out how to put dots on a map. Like, this can't be that hard. And so Ziptility called and said, hey, we offer a solution where you can map your own system. And it was like a eureka moment. And so they brought this to us and it just revolutionized everything that we did. We were able to all of a sudden not just map our system, but track all of our work orders and document all of these repairs that we were making, keep track of our inventory. And it was really intuitive and easy to use from the field. Legitimately saved me personally 15 hours a week in administrative time. And so I had all sorts of time. And the team at Ziptility, a lot of companies talk about being about their customer and wanting to really get into the weeds, but these guys just got it. They were obsessive about how do we do things and how do we work. And I think that they started seeing how we were using the data that we were collecting, the records that we were collecting to make managerial decisions and leverage that to tell a really good story, to apply for funding, to fix some of these solutions. And from there, we just developed, honestly, a really good friendship. I wasn't particularly looking to sell, and I wouldn't say that they were particularly looking to buy. We just love working together.
So when you're thinking about the product, I mean, it's really awesome that it landed so well. You've already been through the stats, right? Roughly 100,000 utilities, 80 to 90% of them are under 1,000, and then 90% of them are really small. This is actually on a kind of gross dollar value basis. There's a limited kind of ability to pay, obviously, because the budgets aren't kind of astronomical. But this is, people think it's a terrible market. We obviously at BIV do not think it's a terrible market, and these people need the tools to be able to keep the people that rely on that network safe. What do you think people get wrong about building technology for these systems, for these customers?
I think that as a buyer, you don't realize that your buyer doesn't know where to start. And so as you're marketing or selling things, if we put out a website, and we have pages like this on our website that say asset management solutions, but we're focused on small utilities, we're going to get inundated with the city of Miami who's looking at bringing in new products or things like that. You have to be able to speak in the same terms that your buyer is looking at. And so for us, I wasn't looking up GIS solutions, even though we had the capability to implement a GIS solution. That's not the terms that we would use to describe it because we didn't have the right language behind us. We were looking for easy mapping solutions. How do I take care of work orders? And I think that that's where a lot of people get wrong is they're not using the language of their buyer and they're not necessarily knowing how their buyer thinks or how their buyer works. And that's what I appreciate about Ziptility was you could just tell right when you used it that it was built to be driven by your thumbs in a trench, with the shovel right next to you. If you don't get that, I can have the best technology in the world, but if my employees aren't going to use it in the field, it doesn't do anything for me. If I have to bring in, and especially in a rural community, somebody from the city to drive up and implement or make changes to stuff, it's just not cost effective. You have to understand the economies of scale too. Like that utility I was talking about, Pinedale Estates, who I absolutely adore and would do anything for those guys. They are broke. I mean, they're such a small utility. They charge 50% more than the surrounding utilities do, but just because of their economies of scale, they bring in like $60,000 a year. Probably 50,000 goes towards fixed expenses. And so they have $10,000 left over at the end of the year to allocate towards capital improvements or projects. And so for them, making a purchase for $2,000 is a monumental decision. And if you go up to a 900 connection utility, they've got 10x the buying capacity, if not more, because their fixed costs are lower. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Ziptility was they priced based on the service connection, not based on the number of seats, because I think that there is something to be said about democratizing your user experience where what ends up happening is either people aren't going to adopt your software and they're not going to use it, or they're just going to cheat you and just use a shared login and really be able to collect the data that they can. I'll tell you a story about when I first hired on at this municipality. I was 21 at the time and just stumbled into the water industry. It was the first job that offered me insurance. It's really what it was. I got married and needed a real job. That's how most guys end up in the industry, is we put on our sweatpants. My boss, Court Carpenter, was just brilliant. He had spent 30 years at the city. He knew where all the bodies were buried, and he would go get all these maps, and he would have to take them down to the engineer and have their GIS intern, who was 20, sit there across the desk and update all this stuff. And I just thought it was kind of insulting, honestly. Like, this guy's brilliant, could have been an engineer if he wanted to, but just got into the trades and ended up in the water industry like a lot of other guys. But you don't trust him to update the maps. Like, if there's anybody who should be updating the maps, it's him. He knows where everything's at. Same thing with the guys in the field. Why are we restricting this technology from the people who need it the most to do their job and also have the best information at their fingertips? So I tend to think of GIS like just like SCADA, you have sensors, your operators can be sensors too. They can collect all this data. And if you can make it really intuitive for them, you can do so much with it.
There are so many things firing. Where I want to go, and we'll come back to the Ziptility tie-up story, is that you sort of brought up this fundamental idea that at the end of each of these connections is a person, right? And a family, and trying to kind of live their lives usually in a rural context, right? If it's a small utility. But there's a lot of chat around everything from consolidation to currently at the federal level, there's moves afoot to reduce the amount of money that's available through revolving funds into the state, etc. I'm just really curious about your view from the ground about what are the kinds of interventions which we should be thinking about in terms of improving the sustainability and, frankly, the outcomes for the people who lie at the end of each of these pipes, because this is the fundamental determinant of their kind of ability to exist, right? I'm just curious as to how you see this kind of Rubik's Cube and what the support could and should be.
If your audience wants to read a phenomenal book about this, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the next 50 years just got released. It's a free ebook because they want to distribute to anybody, but they talk extensively about this topic from an operations standpoint to consolidation to compliance drivers. I would say there's not hardly anything in the book that I disagree with. Must read, I would say, for those in the industry that are focused on this topic right now.
Safe Drinking Water Act, the next 50 years.
Yeah, Manny Teodora led it, and they have bunch of different authors. Catherine Sorensen, who's local here to Arizona, did the last chapter. But the kind of final chapter of the book talks about what is risk to a utility from a policy standpoint. When you write policy, you want to make it really easy to measure. And so it's easy to measure Do we have bacteria? Yes or no? If you have bacteria, you're out of compliance. These are the steps you follow. Do you have lead? Does it exceed this level? Yes, no. And then you go from there. What we're seeing around the US is this really state level driven legislation and policy focused more on what we call TMF, which is technical, managerial, and financial capacity. These are in a lot of ways intangible. And so it's hard to write policy around, but they're all focused on the same things. And when I first started doing contract operations, and really Pinedale Estates being my first eye-opening experience, this is we're the richest country in the richest period of human history. How are people drinking this water? How is this the state that we're living in? And initially, I thought that it was poor operations, to be honest with you. As time has gone on, I've realized that a lot of it comes down to governance structures and with no bad intentions. But when you have community members that don't have the technical background of what it means to operate a utility, coupled with the fact that the utility that they operate, they typically got for free. They didn't have to invest the money to install all of these mains. It was paid for by some developer. Developer handed it over to the community and they inherited all of this new infrastructure. That caused them to operate their utility on a cash basis typically, which meant that they were running it in a lot of ways just like a household budget. I want to put away 10% at the end of the year. That means I'm doing good. That works really well. And it's very sneaky and insidious because for 30, 40 years, you can get away with that and it won't make a difference. And your water rates can be pretty affordable. Maybe your cost of service for operations or power goes up. But the real driver of cost is these, your asset heavy things like infrastructure and your pipeline. What happens is you've got kind of this growing wave that's coming up behind these utilities as things start to fail, coupled with the fact that all they know about the utility is their own specific experience in that one utility. And so if you have 20 breaks per mile per year, that's normal to you. It's just like, oh, we have a lot of leaks, but you don't have a concept for how many leaks should we be having. You've never seen anything else. And utilities age a lot like our human body. We've got this retaining wall on the upper half of our property. And my 5-year-old hops off this 5-foot wall and just rolls off onto the ground, doesn't think anything of it. Well, I'm 35. And so if I go to hop off this wall, like I maybe grab the side of it and like hurdle it, but I'm doing pretty good. But my dad, if he hopped off it, he'd blow out his knee. It's the same thing with infrastructure. You don't see that slow progression and slow failure. And when you compound that with contract operations and board member turnover, some of our utilities have had 100% turnover on the board, 2-3 times over, 100% turnover in the billing department, 2-3 times over, and 100% turnover in the operations department prior to us coming on over the course of 10 years. What organization do you think would do well in that regard? And so from a policy standpoint, to bring it back to your initial question, I think that one big thing would be an asset inventory and having to do an accrual-based accounting system where you account for all of your assets and you include depreciation. That would solve so many issues, just forcing that function right there. The other thing would be board member training, but consolidation should be so heavily incentivized because the money that we're giving out for SRF, while it's very needed and just a wonderful program, you're going to put people back in the same situation. And so I'm a big believer in intervening on the front end, or if you're going to go give them that sort of funding, making sure that they're not having to come back 30 years from now and be sustainable. Because like you said, the end customer is really the most important person in this conversation. They should be able to have healthy water, but they should also be able to have good infrastructure because what's your home worth if your utility fails? Like nobody's going to buy it. In our part of Arizona, we're real prone to wildfires. If they can't get insurance because there's not fire suppression and you can't sell to somebody, nobody can get a mortgage on your house. How much does that affect the economics of that local community? How much does that affect a person's personal assets? We need to be looking at it because there is a huge wave. We are a very young country, but most of our infrastructure, especially in the West, was built in the 70s as we built out all these suburbs, and it was given to us for free. The developers came in, built these subdivisions. We took them on and just have been taking on the rates, but we haven't been planning, in my opinion, for the replacement of this infrastructure. And to bring it back to that Safe Drinking Water Act the next 50 years, Catherine Sorensen's final point is It's the infrastructure failing that's the greatest health risk, in my opinion. I mean, PFAS is a health risk, but the amount of money that we're spending on PFAS to deal with these chronic contaminants, if we put that same money towards infrastructure, and like I said, some might disagree with me on this, you're going to be able to prevent so many bacterial outbreaks that are really going to affect a lot more people. Every time that you have a break, especially in a small system, you have a depressurization event and you expose the entire community to tremendous amounts of risk.
I hadn't thought about it in the context of, if you want to get the attention of kind of the mainstream of politics outside of the deliriously local, talking about this stuff as actually underpinning household wealth. If you see the truth, right, which is the determinant of the overall wealth of the household is often largely predicated on the value of the real estate in which it sits, because that's the structure that we build this kind of economy on.
Yeah, it's your number one builder of income. Yeah.
This is bad news.
Very bad. Well, and the other thing I would say from a policy standpoint that's worth mentioning is I live in a very rural part of Arizona that if you look at election trends, you can probably guess where our community votes. And so the scariest thing that you can say if you roll up to one of our communities is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. You would be shocked how many utilities call us and say, hey, we're having these problems. We go and do a tour of the system, look at their infrastructure. Our immediate advice is to them, hey, you should report this to the state and let them know, because there's resources that can help you. And because they've never interacted with the government really at all, and they don't realize that regulators are people with dogs and kids, just like you and I are, they really care about this stuff. And their whole job is to help support these utilities. What they say is, well, we don't want the state to shut us down. And I tell them, I said, the last thing the state wants is to come and operate your utility. The state wants to see you be successful and they want people to be healthy. There's no point in hiding kind of the things that are going on, because there's resources that are there that are set aside just for utilities like yours to solve it. And so a lot of it is a perception issue. And that's where I think we need to be thoughtful in our policy approach of, you want to drive local change, but a lot of it is education, helping people see the value, because we don't have as much volunteerism in our society as we had 50 years ago. It's really hard for these small systems to get board members to even show up to a meeting. And you think if you have a 100 connection utility, if you have 5 board members from 5 different households, that means 5% of the community is actively involved in overseeing that. And probably another 20% have done it over the past 20 years. And it's just growing more and more difficult. And so they're being forced to now take tasks that, managerial tasks or even sometimes operational tasks that used to be done by the board members, and now contract those services out, and it's driving up the cost of service. And so the community looks at them and says, hey, why are our costs going up? And the real reason is because it's been subsidized by volunteer labor for the past 20 or 30 years, and that's changing. And it's just going to continue that way.
Utterly fascinating. I want to take you back to the talk between you and Ziptility. So you became a customer of Ziptility, obviously really liked the way in which the product had been built, obviously liked what that said about the team that built it. But you guys deciding to join forces is a relatively rare event of two people with distinct approaches to a similar market that other people wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But you chose to join forces. What was the kind of overall logic that you kind of landed upon? And secondly, whatever you can say about the practical, the haptics of just getting that deal done, so that you and Tyler, you and your team at Mogollon, and Tyler and the team at Ziptility were then working together, right? That this was an integrated whole.
I think it kind of happened organically in a lot of ways. Similar to me starting a contract operations company, it wasn't like I had some big master plan of I want to get acquired. And I don't think Ziptility, and I'll speak on their behalf here, I don't think they had the intentions of necessarily buying a contract operations company either. I really cared about water, and it was really clear that they did too. And so I was looking from our business landscape. It's a zero-sum game. There are only so many utilities. I can't just make new utilities to go and operate. Our next steps in growth, we're basically going to be looking at having to do like a franchise model and expand to new regions, which still is a possibility. And I've got some great employees that if they want to take up that baton, I'd cheerlead them and we'd have plenty of opportunity to do so. But frankly, as an operator, I have today, if we had a call and there was a catastrophic break, I'd have to drop off and go respond to it because I feel an obligation to these communities. So to really impact change at scale, I just didn't have the time or bandwidth to do much more than what we were doing without expanding to new regions. And it was going to happen really slow. And I want to see small utilities in particular be successful. And I wanted to see it done in an affordable way. And so I was really excited and still am about the ability for us to be able to take the things that we've learned and build it into software in intuitive ways. So as people are collecting data that they may not even realize the value of, we can roll all that information up in a way that makes it super impactful. And so the ability for me to take what I know and put it into tech was incredibly valuable to me personally, just to scale and be able to help and support systems. But on the Ziptility standpoint, I think it was an opportunity for them to kind of have an incubation bed where they can deploy tech to people who actually use it. You don't have to worry about the weird calls of, hey, what's your feedback, and, trying to navigate, because you have that direct IV into the vein of, how does this feel? What things should we change? What things should we add? And not just to me, but to our field staff that's using it every single day. From a practical standpoint, that's really what drove our incentive structures. From a business standpoint, Ziptility was at a good spot in timing where they were just hitting cash flow break even. Mogollon was just big enough that they could make an acquisition offer, but not so big that it was really sidelining the whole business. Also, we had just landed a ton of these project management contracts through SRF. And so I was looking at a huge tax bill, frankly, for this project management. And so the idea to be able to turn that into equity and be able to take advantage of some of the small business tax credits was interesting to me. I think that we didn't really have to we had legal obviously involved, but we were able to do a lot of it just on napkins based on relationship, and then kind of build out, okay, this works for you guys, this works for us. I feel good about this. This is my concerns. But I mean, really what it came down to was the guys at Ziptility really care about small water and wastewater. And I made that really clear that this is what I'm about. This isn't just like a talking point. This is my special interest that I want to focus on and see people be successful. We had this shared vision and just figured out a way to make it happen. And it took about a year. It was a lot of time for anybody who's going through the process. It takes a long time. It's been great. And we're a year out now from that transition, and I wouldn't do it differently. It's been awesome.
Just paint us a picture of, once you are done with what you're trying to achieve alongside Tyler and the whole team, what does that edifice look like? What does that company look like? What do you think the real potential is of what you're trying to create?
I think that there's so many disconnected tools, and there's a lot of great tools, but there is GIS, there is inventory management, there is work orders and CMS and all. SCADA, AMI is its own thing. You've got all of these different tools. What I've loved about Ziptility from the start is that I can send somebody out in the field and they can come across a valve, for example. They find a valve that wasn't there. They create a work order. They install a valve riser and turn the valve, document all of that. Well, when you're in this fragmented world of all of these different tools, you have to enter 5 or 10 different things into these different platforms to have one cohesive picture. And the idea that these guys can enter one single task and one single function, and it will pull your parts from inventory. It'll map everything to where it's supposed to be. You can log your man hours and tasks. You can log your fleet and equipment costs. And all of a sudden, from a managerial level, I can have an entire picture of what the cost drivers are for my utility. But also the guys in the field will know really the practical thing of, hey, there's a valve here that we didn't know about and it's functional. And so if somebody leaves and 5 years later, I hire 2 employees down the line, they'll know the same information that that first guy left. That's incredibly valuable, especially when the silver tsunami's upon us. I mean, it's here.
Saying more about that and its relationship to this kind of informational deficit. It's sort of absolutely extraordinary, I think, underappreciated, massive problem that we are kind of just at the bottom of the hill of understanding quite how big a problem it is. Can you sort of tell us what it is and how it shows up in real life?
So the silver tsunami is something that we talk about within the industry quite a bit. But for those of you that don't know, in the early 90s, they passed a revision to the Safe Drinking Water Act that required operators to be certified for the first time. And so there was actually a certification process that was administered. There was this initial wave and hiring that accompanied a lot of other rules. And so most of the people who were hired, and I think the rule went into effect in 96, and somebody's probably going to know exactly when it was, but basically it's been 30 years since that point. And so if you were a 25-year-old operator at the time, you're now 55 and you're retiring out of the industry. And so the math is that roughly 50 to 75% of active operators in the field are eligible for retirement within the next 5 to 10 years. And really, that's old data in a lot of ways. I talked with the utility.
Yeah, I say I think it's been around for.
They've been saying that for 10 years. Yeah. I tell people it is here. It is so here. I talked with the utility just a month ago that they have 63 full-time employees in the field. And of those 63 full-time employees, almost all of them were there for less than 5 years at this point. And they had 3 people who had been there for 20 years. There's just this huge brain drain that's happening. And if you haven't kept good records, it makes it super hard to onboard new employees because you don't know where anything's at. If you give a guy a map and it's accurate, they can probably figure it out if they have a little bit of experience, but it's becoming incredibly important to be able to capture that knowledge and turn it around as quick as you can. And I think Ziptility is the best at it, quite frankly, because if I have an employee that has a little bit of experience, which is what we're going to start seeing a lot more of, and as I'm kind of looking in my magic 8-ball, I think that the days of the 30-year employee are quickly going away, and you're going to see guys acting really as mercenaries and getting hired from this utility to this utility to this utility, and having the best records at their disposal is going to get them in the field and actually be successful. Instead of really taking 2 years to have an employee that can do something for you, you could have it in days if they have the records that they need at their fingertips.
Having an up-to-date source of truth and system of records. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just pretty curious. I'm going to give you a magic wand. What would be your top thing that you could change about anything about kind of small systems, how they're funded, organized, like text that you're not allowed to play like Ziptility in every pocket? Because that's obviously going to happen organically anyway. So like you don't need to go there. Like, what is it? What do you think would be the highest leverage thing?
The data would show that hiring high-level operators is really impactful. Safe Drinking Water Act, the next 50 years, has a great chapter, I think chapter 3, that says basically the impact on compliance. Hiring one high-level grade 4 operator will have the exact same effect on compliance as hiring 10 low-level operators. For example, I've got an employee that just started for us. He's fresh out of high school, and he got his first grade 1 certification within 3 months of hiring on. Great guy. I really think he's going to just absolutely go out and kill it, but he doesn't know anything about operating utility. Like, he can pass the test. Legally speaking, he could operate half of our utilities without any oversight, with no one there, just him by himself, because these low-level utilities or smaller utilities have such a low barrier to entry. And so I think that Washington State in particular has a really great model called the satellite management agencies, where if you're going to be doing contract operations, in particular, whether you own the utility or you operate or a combination of both, you have to go through a different kind of process. And I think that that's really how you address a lot of that stuff from a low level. And then I think highly incentivizing and educating board members on the impact of consolidation would be the other thing. And as I stated earlier, just basically forcing the function that when you turn in your budget, it has to be on an accrual basis and you have to have depreciation would make a tremendous amount of impact, because people just aren't generating the revenue that they need to actually be sustainable.
I love it. That speaks volumes. I think that one of the uses of the magic wand would be an intervention in accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
That's coming from an operator too,
That's definitely a first for us. But it just goes to show the sophistication of your thought and how deeply you've really gone into the work that you've chosen, which I think is really profoundly admirable. And I think, these small systems are very, very lucky to have someone like you on their side. And I really, from the first time we met and saw you kind of operate in Ziptility, I really do think it can be the substrate of some really profound, but also inherently scalable change. So it's really great that you're there. We have come, Blake, to our final question that we ask all of our guests on the Fundamental Molecule, which is, What is the single and most important piece of advice for future and aspiring water entrepreneurs?
Seek the welfare of your customers. I think that that's prior to Mogollon getting acquired, our guiding mission and vision statement is seeking first and foremost the welfare of the communities that we serve. And I think that in the free market, if you are crazy about your customer and you make their life easier and you really love their problems and care about them, you're going to be successful. You have to figure out how to do that in ways that are cost effective and intuitive, but really truly caring and not just like in a lip service bottom line sort of way. Ziptility last year, 40% of their sales came from customer referrals. Your customers should be your biggest cheerleaders for you. And that's been the same thing with Mogollon. We've never advertised once. We've grown dang near 1,000% over the past 5 years. And it's just driven by our customers know that we care and they refer us to other people. So that would be first and foremost. The other thing would just being humble. I think the analogy of Icarus is a great one that his dad gave him the advice, don't fly too close to the sun or your wings are going to melt. Don't get too low or you're going to get bogged down and fall into the sea. There's a lesson there in humility and just hubris. Don't get too excited when things are going good. Stay the course and be steady. I think that a lot of times, especially in the entrepreneur world, and when you start getting the supercharged power of VC funding coming behind you, we can overestimate what we can do in the short term and underestimate what we can do in the long term. And so just being really steady in how you go about doing things and having a plan and sticking to it is key. And also just not getting too sucked into your own hype. If you let your customers be your hype people, let them be the ones that are pumping you up and getting excited. Just focus on serving them kind of first and foremost.
That's very wise and beautifully articulated. Blake Anderson, what a huge pleasure to have you on the Fundamental Molecule.